In today's tutorial, I'll be taking you through the process of creating a realistic looking planet for your fantasy map. If you're new to the channel, I recommend checking out my previous videos for an in-depth guide on using Gaea 2 to create realistic terrains. You'll need the height maps generated in those earlier steps as inputs for this stage, so make sure you're caught up before moving forward. Today we're going to focus on the additional workflows that you need to get your map ready for a planet render. I've followed a similar workflow to Blender Guru's Realistic Earth tutorial, which I'll link in the description. You can watch that tutorial to get a better understanding of how to set up the Blender scene, or you can download the Blender file I've prepared and simply replace the textures with your own. The key thing to understand when you're creating a globe representation of your map is distortion. Since we'll be working with an equirectangular map, which is a 2:1 aspect ratio, distortion is inevitable, especially near the poles. Take a look at this image. You'll notice how the distortion becomes more pronounced as we approach the poles. The land masses, especially those close to the top or the bottom of the map, appear stretched and squeezed. If your fantasy world has important land features near the poles, you'll need to account for this distortion. Otherwise, they might look dramatically different once the map wraps around the globe. For this tutorial, I'll be using a height map created by Josh Foreman, co-author of the Scarred King trilogy, who commissioned this map for his world. He's done an incredible job, and it's a great example of how putting in time and effort at this stage pays off in the final result. If you'd like to explore this world behind this map, I've included links to both Josh's book and his YouTube channel in the description. You can see here he's really done a fantastic job of this map. We can see he's taking into account for the distortion near the poles, but whatever you have to start off with, I'm sure you'll be able to get good results. One hurdle we will have to overcome is the fact that Gaea requires a square input file. But as an output, we need an equirectangular map with a 2:1 aspect ratio. There are a few different ways to work around this, but the easiest method is to simply expand your map so the height is equal to the width. You can do this by going to Image, Canvas Size, copying the width and pasting it into the height, and then anchoring at the top, and do the canvas extension color as black. And here we go. Now we have the full square image. Taking this approach, once we've finished processing in Gaea, we'll simply crop the image back to a 2:1 aspect ratio. However, keep in mind that this approach comes with a trade-off. Since we're not using all of the available pixels in Gaea's output, the resolution may be lower than desired. This is especially noticeable if you're using the free version of Gaea, as it limits the output resolution, leading to slightly lower quality results. If you're lucky, like I've been with this map that was commissioned, there's only C at the exact middle of the image. This means I can simply split the image in half without worrying about any of the land masses. In this case, I'll process the two halves separately in Gaea and then recombine them later in Photoshop to restore the equirectangular aspect ratio. This method allows us to avoid the pixel loss issue and gives us a higher quality results, since we're processing two square sections instead of one padded square map. You can do this in a similar workflow to what we did before. So this time we go to Image, Canvas Size, and this time we're going to take the height value and paste that into the width. And we're going to anchor once on the left and click Proceed. And now you can see that we have a square representation with only the left-hand side of the map. We'll export this and then do it a second time, this time anchoring on the right. And here we have the right-hand side of the map. So we'll export these two height maps along with, follow the same workflow for your biome masks that we will have created in previous tutorials. And then we'll have two parallel sets of files to take through to Gaea. The most complex, but also the most detailed approach is to isolate individual continents from your map. This allows you to process each continent separately in Gaea and then reassemble the final map by carefully overlaying the continents back into their original positions. So in order to do this, we would want to take the crop tool, and holding Shift, we can make sure that we maintain a square aspect ratio. Select the continent, done. And then we want to kind of remove these other land masses. So you just want to either mask them out directly, or I just create a black layer, invert the mask, draw around the continent we want to keep, fill it with white, and then click deselect, go back to the mask and invert. There's probably a quicker way of doing that, but yeah, this one works for me. So you'd want to repeat that process for each of the distinct land masses. So this method really requires a high level of precision, especially when matching the color map to the height map, but it can give you the highest possible resolution. Keep in mind, however, unless you're planning on creating an animation where the entire globe is visible at once, you probably won't need to worry about showing the entire world at the same time. For most still renders, you can actually just focus on one continent or region at a time, which will then save you time and resources. Now, let's take a look at Gaea. Again, I'm not going to go into too much detail here. Check out my previous videos for that. But I just wanted to highlight some of the key considerations and common pitfalls. First, you'll want to create your entire node workflow for one section of your map. While in previous videos, I've shown you how to include elevation changes under the sea to create more interesting color variations, but we'll want to avoid that this time. The goal is to keep the sea a uniform color, so there aren't any obvious edges when we recombine the maps later. A really important consideration is to ensure that the terrain definition values and the sea level values stay consistent across all sections of your map. A really important consideration is to ensure that the terrain definition values, which are found in project build settings and terrain, and the sea level values stay consistent across all sections of your map. If these values differ, you'll end up with noticeable seams when you try to stitch the sections back together. So for each section of your map, you'll want to save a new Gaea terrain file. Then, just like in previous videos, you'll export the roughness, the texture, and the height maps. Once you've processed one section, you use the save as function for the next section, and then just load the corresponding height maps and biomes or any other files that you've created for your map. If you've done this correctly, the height and color values should line up easily when you then reassemble the Gaea outputs in Photoshop. Next, we'll move into Photoshop. Start by creating a new document, a custom template, and when defining the height and the width of the document, make sure that you're matching the resolution that you used for your Gaea outputs. In my case, I've created two 4K outputs, so we'll need to set the y-axis to 4K, which is 4096 pixels, and the x-axis to 8K, which is 8192 pixels, to account for both sections of the map. Whatever the size of your map, your width will always need to be exactly double the height. This ensures that you maintain the proper 2:1 aspect ratio for an equirectangular map. Once your document is ready, you can simply drag the files into your map. So if we, so for here, my height map here for the left is the C out. And we want to be really precise. It should snap to the far left. And then you'll have a separate build. So these are all based on the name of your Gaea file names. So we'll open up the right. And again, C out is what I need. Sorry, you need to click done on there first. C out. And this time we will be moving precisely to the right. And it's worth, inspecting at this point, just really making sure that there's no kind of visible line or difference where you've put the two images, because this will then be visible in Blender if there is. So I've done this for the height map, and then you will want to repeat this for the roughness map and the color map. Now you can see here actually these white bands, and that's because I've also included a ice cap in this case. And this is just to kind of help cover up the really highly distorted areas at the poles. So I'll include this ice cap file in a Google Drive link, so you can add this if you want to use it for yourself. So I'm just going to go to the ice cap. And so here we're doing this for the height map. So I want the erosion out. And in this case, I've only generated one height map. And that's because instead of trying to split this and create two, I'm actually going to stretch this. And the reason being is this kind of then counteracts the the kind of squeezing effect that will happen when we map this onto the globe. So these areas are stretched on the 2D map. So this helps give a more sort of realistic result. Now, obviously we can't see our height map now. So for this, we want to set this to linear dodge add. And what this does is, it's added to the height map here, but it's also allowing the kind of the original terrain underneath to have some influence. If I just go back to my example from before, there's one change that I have made, actually adding in a levels adjustment. So just click adjustment, add levels. And this was just because I wanted to make the height map a bit more contrasty before adding the ice cap. So essentially all I did here was take the black dropper and use that to click somewhere on the ocean. And then I just moved this right hand, so the kind of the white point, closer to the edge of the histogram, being careful not to go too far, because if you go too far, you'll start clipping, and then it will start creating kind of flat spots in your height map, which we don't want. So once I've done that, adding in the ice cap with a linear dodge gives us the file that we will use as our height map in Blender. Now, we also want to do this for the color. So it's the same process. So we add the ice cap color file in, stretching it across. But this time the difference is we just use the lighten overlay instead of the linear dodge. Repeat this again for the roughness map. And then we will export all of these to PNG to be used in Blender. If you have followed a workflow where you are going one continent at a time and placing it back into the image, you'll probably want to use your original world map. Maybe you'll have to crop it slightly to get that perfect 2:1 aspect ratio if it isn't already perfect. But use that as a guide to kind of move your continents in place. I'd recommend once you've added the height maps from Gaea, just turning the opacity down of that layer so you can help align them. But it's going to be really important that you manage to align the color maps and the height maps perfectly. If you're having trouble with this, then I really would recommend doing something like this, where you essentially place the height map near the center if it's equatorial, or slightly more to the north or the south, and then just expanding the rest of the canvas to just fill up that 2:1 aspect ratio. Again, this is what I did for the videos on the intro, and can save you a headache. Okay, now we're going to move over into Blender. If you've followed the Blender Guru tutorial, or if you've loaded up my Blender file, then there are just a few things that we need to adjust in order to turn the default globe into your own fantasy world. So first, select the surface in the scene editor. Then go to the shader editor. So click here, shader editor, and make sure it's set to object and not world. If you're using my Blender file, I've already highlighted the 3 key areas where you'll need to upload your custom images. The first is for the color map, which will apply the sort of the texture to the globe. The second is the roughness map, which will handle making the water reflective while keeping the land less reflective. And then finally, the height map. And finally, the height map. This is what will give your land its 3-dimensional look. Now, let's take a look at some of the key settings you might want to adjust. First, when working with the height map, you'll want to check the displacement node. So by adjusting the scale, you can control how much the height map affects the sphere. Increasing the scale will enhance the strength. So if let's put this up to something quite extreme. Yeah, this will really enhance the strength of the elevation, making the terrain features more prominent. But let's put that back down to where it was. Another one, so coming out of the color map, is I've added a gamma node. So sometimes the textures generated in Gaea can appear a bit flat. So by increasing the gamma value, you can get bolder and richer colors from your map. Connected to that, there's also a hue saturation node affecting just the color of the sea. If you want to create a more atmospheric effect, you can lower the saturation to desaturate the sea color. This makes it feel as though the atmosphere is more responsible for the color of the ocean rather than the map itself. Now, let's switch over to the clouds object. There are a couple of key settings we can adjust here as well. So first of all, coming out of the color output of the cloud texture, I've added a color ramp. This can be used to decrease the overall coverage of the clouds. I recommend using this sparingly because if you go too far, the clouds might start to look a bit unnatural. But essentially, by dragging the black handle on the color ramp, you can remove some of the less prominent areas of the cloud layer. The second setting you might want to tweak is the displacement. By adjusting the scale, you can give the clouds a more 3-dimensional appearance. Increasing the scale will make the clouds appear to stand out more from the surface of the planet. Adjust this based on the look you're going for to get the right feel for your map. One final thing you might want to adjust before we do the final render is the atmospheric density. So to do that, just go and select the Atmo object from the collection, then head back to the shader editor, and here you can increase or decrease the density value. Adjusting this will give you more control over how thick or thin the atmosphere appears, depending on the look that you're going for. So to set up the scene for a render, I recommend turning off both the atmosphere and the clouds for now. This will let us focus on the land underneath, and it will improve the performance in Blender. So we want to move the camera around to get the right camera angle. I like something where we've got kind of the edge of the globe. I also want to highlight the kind of the reflection from some of these rivers. So as well as the angle of the camera, you might want to change the position of the sun as well. So to do this, we select the sun. And if you don't see this properties panel, just press the N key and it will appear. And we're going to be changing the rotation along the Z-axis. And this will kind of simulate that sort of day-night cycle. I found that shadows tend to look the best if you have this kind of dusk or dawn situation. So play around with the sun angle until you find something that kind of really brings out the details that you want to see in your landscape and the clouds themselves. So once you've got something that you're happy with, re-enable your clouds and your atmosphere. You might want to be showcasing a specific feature, like I was with the rivers, but then you find that the clouds are now obscuring it. So you can either, as I said before, use the color ramp to change the cloud coverage, or you might also want to just select the clouds, and again with the properties panel, use this Z rotation and find a kind of a gap in the clouds that will allow those details to come through. At this point, it's clear that I'm creating more of an artistic shot rather than trying to capture as much of the map as possible. So if this is the kind of shot that you're aiming for, you really don't need to worry about processing the whole globe at once. You can easily get away with following the workflow for just a single continent at a time. Once you've got your camera angle set and you're happy with the scene, it's time to render. So go ahead and hit render, and then we'll move over to the Compositing tab to finish things up. You'll notice this is following the Blender Guru tutorial that I've got a transparent background. So this is going to be important for that compositing step. Once your render is complete, we can see here now that the way that we are compositing, so following the process described by Andrew Price in the Blender Guru tutorial, we now have the kind of the black space, and then we also have this kind of thin atmosphere edge. Now, in the Blender Guru tutorial, he suggests adding a render layer that isn't present anymore in Blender 4.2. And looking online, people have suggested to use the diffuse direct pass. And while that can work, I do find it ends up giving this uneven edge. It's not quite working how I would expect it to. So an alternative I found is to actually use the alpha instead. And this gives the sort of the desired atmospheric effect. The only downside to this method is that it also applies the atmosphere effects to parts of the world that are in shadow. So this workflow isn't best suited when you have the camera including parts of the world that are in darkness. You'll have to use the diffuse direct pass in that case instead. And there we have it. Our final render. This dramatic image will really bring your world to life, making it feel like a living, breathing ecosystem. I know this tutorial may have been a bit more advanced compared to some of my earlier videos, so I encourage you to check those out if anything didn't quite make sense. As always, if there's any particular step that wasn't clear, feel free to reach out in the comments. I'm always happy to help out. If you found this tutorial helpful, please give it a like and consider subscribing for more map making and world building content.